of John, chapter 20. Early in the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed at the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, and said, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have put him." So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. Now both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. And he bent over and he looked into the tomb, and he saw the strips of linen lying there, but he did not go in. Then Simon Peter, who was behind him, arrived, but he went right on in the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the burial cloth that had been around Jesus' head. The cloth was folded up by itself, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple, who had reached the tomb first, went inside, and he saw and he believed. They still did not understand from the scripture that Jesus had to arise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to their homes, but Mary stood outside the tomb crying. And as she wept, she bent over and looked into the tomb and saw two angels in white, seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. And they asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They have taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they have put him." At this she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize that it was Jesus. "Woman," he said, "why are you crying? Who is it that you're looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will go and get him." And Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned towards him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. And Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them that I am returning to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went with the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them that he had said these things to her. On that evening of the first day of the week, when the disciples were together with the doors locked for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." And after he said this, he showed them his hands and his side. And the disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord. Again, Jesus said, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, I am sending you." And with that, he breathed on them, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive anyone his sins, they are forgiven. And if you do not forgive them, they are not forgiven." This is the reading of the Holy Scriptures. Thanks to God. Well, I changed my title probably 3 or 4 times today. For today, I should say. Because I thought this really fit more the point. Confused and emotional overload. When I came back from my trip, everyone wants to know, what's your favorite part, or what was it like, or what was, And that was basically the trip. Confused and emotional overload. The things that we have, the preconceived ideas, the perceptions that we have in our head, when I got over there, they weren't quite that way. And at the funniest places, or the most, I should say, what I thought maybe would be the bizarre times, was when you had such an emotional overload that you didn't even have words for it, and you didn't even know why. You didn't even know why you were feeling what you were feeling, or what you were picking up. And as I read the 4 Gospels for today, one cannot read it and not be confused. If you really read all 4 of them, they don't quite match up. The only thing that is the same is there was angels, there was an empty tomb, and Jesus was gone. And then he appears. But all the other little details, they're different. Close. But some talk about some talk about others, and they don't quite mesh, and there's different people and different ways it happened, and that's kind of how I felt when I went to Israel. I had a preconceived idea of how I thought thought I had a pretty good grasp on some of the things that had happened until we got over there. And then they started telling us other stories or other history, and it didn't quite mesh. And I was confused. But the overlying theme was still the same. It didn't change the story, maybe just the details. I think of Mary that morning. She had been with Jesus. She had been one of his closest disciples, but as you know, in the Jewish tradition, women were second rate. Jesus never looked at women as second rate, but in the culture's eyes, they were. So she would never be one of his 12, 13. It just wasn't going to happen. But do you notice how she's the one that's there? When Peter denied him, she was the one following him. She was the one at the cross. We don't hear of anybody except for James and John, maybe, that are mentioned standing there at the cross. It is her who goes early in the morning. Now, I did give you a cliffhanger last week. When I said I was going to tell you on Friday, we kind of led up to it. Now I'm going to give you the answer to the cliffhanger. When Mary, the sister of Martha, anointed Jesus' feet the week before he died, and Judas was mad at her for wasting a year's worth of wage on this expensive perfume as she anointed his feet. There was a reason for that anointing. Because Jesus was not going to stay in the tomb to be anointed. He had already been anointed. Now again, if you read the different Gospels, you hear that Joseph of Arimathea and they came in and they put 100 pounds of spices and nard on him, but then the other ones say that didn't happen. I was told that Jewish tradition is they just put a sheet over them because you cannot see an unclothed body. And they would prepare them, put the sheet, and then before they left, they would grab the corner of the sheet and they would pull it and walk away. But see, nothing went the same with Jesus. If you read some of the scriptures, it talks about a cloth. Other ones talk about strips of linen. Then John talks about strips of linen and a cloth for Jesus' head, right? So there's all these different things that are going on. But it's not to change the story. It's to broaden the story. For those of you who had the opportunity to do the Bible study with us on the Book of Mysteries through Jonathan Kahn, I love the little details, as we noticed from Good Friday, that nothing goes unnoticed. Nothing is happenstance. And there's all these little things that are playing into it that we don't even know about. And the same happened with Easter. What we see is an open tomb and Jesus is gone. And if you read the Gospel of Mark, the women are so scared that they don't even go and tell anybody. It just says they ran away, scared. And then he puts an addendum on it. Do you notice the one command that the angels and Jesus both gave to the women? Go and tell the disciples to meet me at Galilee. How many people went to Galilee that day? None? Jesus had even told them before he died that he would be in Galilee. Not one person went. Not one person said, you know what? He talked about resurrecting. Maybe I don't know what else to do. Maybe I'll just go to Galilee and wait. Not one. Even when they were told to go to Galilee, it says the disciples looked at Mary in the one gospel and said it was nonsense. Nothing is nonsense. And like I said, God has a specific reason for everything. In the Jewish tradition, they have what's called the Day of Reshit. It's the day after the Sabbath of Passover. So we had the Passover on Friday. There would have been Sabbath from Friday to Saturday. And it was the day after, which is Sunday. And the Reshit is the first sheaf of the spring, right? They have two harvests. They have one in the spring and one in the fall. And in the spring, it's the first sheaf that they cut with the sickle. They bring that before God. And it would be lifted up to God and dedicated to Him. And then it represented all the sheaves, the whole harvest that would be collected that spring, that would follow. And by its consecration, the entire harvest then was consecrated. It was the day of new life. It still is. And it ends the winter. And it marks the beginning of springtime. When did Jesus die? He died on Passover, on Friday. When was he in the tomb? On the Sabbath. When did he arise? On Sunday, the day of Reshit, right? It happened on the day when the first fruits are raised up from the earth, when he overcame sin and death. And because he was consecrated, we are all consecrated in and through him, and he gives us new life. Well, what about the tomb? Does the tomb actually signify anything other than just a grave? Well, the irony of the tomb is it's a place where all hope ends, right? And where dreams end, and where life ends, and where everything ends. The tomb is a place of the end. But in God, the tomb becomes a place of the beginning. In God, the journey goes from not life to death, but from death to life. That's right. You know what? I'm excited. I'm getting some puzzled looks from adults, and I got a little one there that's tracking right along. It is a place of beginnings. In the place of hopelessness, we find what? True hope. And in the place of sorrow, we find joy. And in a place of death, we are born again. Messiah had to rise on Sunday because it is the first day. Jewish, what? You have Sabbath is on Saturday. Friday to Saturday. That's the Sabbath. He had to rise on the first because it is new beginnings. Now the seventh day, as we said, is the day of rest. Could that even play in anything? Jesus died, we looked on Friday, Good Friday. He died on the sixth day, which is the day of man, right? And what did God do? He created man on what? The sixth day. And what did God do on the seventh day? He rested. And what did Jesus do? He rested in the tomb. For a whole day, he did nothing. And then the first day of the week is when Jesus arose. When Jesus appears to his disciples, he says, "Peace be to you." Not once, but we read in John, he says it twice, right? Why would Jesus say that? He could have said anything like, "Surprise," or "Here I am," or "I'm back," or "I can't believe you didn't meet me in Galilee." But he says, "Peace be to you." There's actually a reason for that. Isaiah had prophesied of the Messiah's atoning death. And he wrote, He was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The punishment for our peace was upon him. Peace only comes after the atonement is made. So it was only after Messiah died on the cross and rose that the peace could be given. Jesus had never said, "Peace be with you," in the scriptures until now, after he arose. But he didn't just say peace. If you look at the true translation, he said shalom. And you may say, well, shalom is the same as peace, but it's not. Shalom means so much more than peace. It means safety and rest and prosperity and wholeness and welfare and completion, fullness, soundness, and well-being. All that in one blessing made possible because the atonement had already been made possible and paid in full. Now see, their part is the same as our part in all this. All they had to do was receive that blessing, to receive that shalom. The shalom of Yeshua, the Messiah. We talked about the tomb. How about where the tomb was placed? The tomb wasn't, I get to take pictures of a lot of tombs like that. Little tombs along the highways now, along the busy main thoroughfare. This tomb is right next to the skull of Golgotha, but it's kind of tucked back, and it was in a garden. Now one could say, well, would it just been a rock garden, but you have to remember in Jesus' time there was vegetation just like there is now again. And Mary thought that who was Jesus? A gardener. If it was just rocks, you wouldn't have a gardener tending to rocks. There had to have been flowers. And especially in the springtime, at the first fruits. Well, the first act after creating man, where did God put him? In a garden. In the Garden of Eden. God's first act towards man was to bring him to a place of life, of fruitfulness and blessing. And when did God bring him into the garden? On the sixth day. Jesus, Messiah, as I said, died on that sixth day of Friday. And what happened? They took him down and they put him in a tomb. But it wasn't just any tomb. It was a garden tomb. A tomb in the garden. On the sixth day. See, God brought man into the garden. So on the sixth day, man brought God into a garden. Into a garden tomb. A garden is a place of life, but a tomb is a place of death, right? And the Garden of Eden was a place of blessing, but the garden tomb was a place of sorrow. The Garden of Eden was a place of God's creation, and the garden tomb is a place of man's creation. God brought man into a place of blessing, but man brought God into a place of man's curse. And why? God allowed himself to be brought to the place of our curse, to give us the power to leave that place, that he might once more bring us to a place of life, a life of his blessings. I want you to think about that for a minute. That's pretty heavy, isn't it? Have you ever thought of the correlation between the Garden of Eden and the garden tomb before? See, there's a difference between knowing about God and actually knowing God. As I said, when I went over there was this confusion, this overload because of things that I thought I knew or I thought it went a certain way, and they're telling us something different. And some things were right and some things were not right. And you can get bogged down in the whole busyness of that, and you lose sight of what's important. It's not the book smart of knowing about God. Anybody can read about God. The Muslims believe in Jesus. They don't believe he's the Son of God, but they believe he's a prophet. The Jews believe in Jesus. He's in throughout all their history, but they don't believe that he's the Son of God. The difference is we have to know God. And the way to know God is to have a personal relationship with him. There's hearing the truth, and there's receiving that truth. These lessons and these experiences that we have in life are not just to be learned, but they're to be received. And how do we receive it? By receiving him, by receiving Jesus. For behind all of the mysteries and the teachings is the truth. And Jesus always started with, I tell you the truth. Or truly, truly, I say unto you. And who is the truth? The truth is the Word. And who is the Word? In the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God. And the Word was God. Jesus is the Word. Jesus is the truth. Jesus is the way. And Jesus is the life. This Jesus of Nazareth, Yeshua, which means salvation, is not a story. It's not a legend. It's not a myth. He is the truth, the way, and the life. And it is only through his dying that our sins could be wiped away, clean as slate, white as snow. And it is only through his rising that we can have everlasting life. So maybe if you're feeling a little emotional overload today, or maybe through the week, or maybe there's times when you hear a song or you read a passage in the Bible and it provokes an emotion that you just don't understand why you're having it. It's because you know Jesus, or you're getting to know Jesus. He's hitting at the heart, not just the mind. And that's okay to be confused. That's all right. That morning, Mary was very confused. But if you notice, what was the other word that it describes her? Overjoyed. She was excited. She didn't know how to act, but she knew what she felt. And she knew Jesus. Because it says in 2 Gospels, she clung to him. If she just knew him up here, she wouldn't be clinging to a dead man. Because he was alive. And she knew his teachings. She knew that he said he would rise again. She hoped. Up here, she wasn't sure until she saw. And then she knew. So what I would like to leave you with today is I hope you have that kind of relationship with Jesus. That you don't just know up here, but you feel right here. You know he's risen. You know it's true. We're living in times where more and more people, I just read this was on the headlines of the UK in the papers right now, there is a higher percentage of people in England that do not believe that the resurrection ever even happened. This is in England. The people who pushed Christianity from the very beginning. Now, most people say it's a myth. You're going to hear this more and more throughout our country and our culture. They're going to try to confuse you. They're going to try to twist things. But you know in your heart what's true. You know that Jesus died for each and every one of you, and he rose for each and every one of you, so that one day we can see his glorious face.